At the end of June 2015, in the quiet suburbs of Riverside, California, police received a distressing 911 call from a frantic woman. Her voice trembled as she spoke of a foul odor emanating from her neighbor's house, a scent so putrid it made her physically ill. At first, officers assumed it was nothing more than a decaying animal carcass. But when they arrived at the modest, beige-colored home at 317 Willow Lane, what they found inside would haunt them forever. A man who had lived among them for over a decade. A man who waved politely to his neighbors and attended the occasional community barbecue. But inside his home, he had been hiding a terrifying secret. A secret that had been rotting behind locked doors for years. This is the horrifying case of William Andrews, the butcher of Riverside. The neighborhood had once been a symbol of working-class resilience, a place where families built their lives, children played in the streets, and neighbors looked out for one another. But over time, economic decline, neglect, and crime transformed it into something unrecognizable. The factories that once provided steady jobs closed down, businesses shuttered their doors, and families who could afford to leave abandoned their homes. What remained was a community that had been left behind, struggling to survive in a city that no longer seemed to care. Boarded-up buildings lined the streets, their windows shattered, their facades covered in graffiti. The roads were cracked, littered with trash, and overgrown with weeds creeping through the concrete. Streetlights flickered inconsistently, casting eerie shadows over empty sidewalks. During the day, the streets were quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of a homeless person pushing a cart or the distant hum of a police siren. At night, the atmosphere shifted, dark alleys became hunting grounds, and the sounds of shouting, gunfire, or screeching tires served as constant reminders of the lawlessness that had taken root. Crime had become the neighborhood's defining feature. Drug dealers operated freely, using abandoned houses as makeshift stash spots and meeting points. Addiction ran rampant, turning once vibrant individuals into hollow shells, wandering the streets in search of their next fix. Prostitutes worked under the dim glow of broken streetlights, their eyes filled with a quiet resignation. Gangs controlled entire blocks, enforcing their own brand of justice with intimidation and violence. The police made occasional appearances, but their presence was fleeting, just another part of the cycle that had long stopped shocking the residents. Most people in the neighborhood had learned to keep to themselves. Asking too many questions could be dangerous, and trust was a luxury no one could afford. The disappearances of women, many of them struggling with addiction, mental illness, or homelessness, were met with little more than a passing mention. For the few who knew them, there was grief, but for the system, they were just statistics, their cases buried under a pile of paperwork that no one wanted to sort through. Then came the smell. At first, people assumed it was just another symptom of the neighborhood's decay, rotting food, sewage backups, or a dead animal left to decompose. But this stench was different. It was overpowering, seeping into homes, lingering in the air no matter how many candles were lit or windows were opened. Some neighbors called the city, reporting the odor, but their complaints were ignored. In a place where death and suffering were commonplace, no one expected that the source of the smell was something far worse than they could ever imagine. For months, the neighborhood lived with that smell, unaware that it was a warning. A sign that something truly monstrous was lurking among them. William Andrews seemed like an unassuming man. Born and raised in the small, quiet town of Elmwood, he lived a life that blended into the background. His neighbors knew him as a solitary figure, often seen walking to and from his home with a detached expression. He kept to himself, never making waves or drawing attention. On the surface, he was just another face in a struggling, economically depressed neighborhood. He worked a series of odd jobs, none of them lasting long enough to form lasting relationships. Most people saw him as nothing more than a loner, someone who never quite fit in. But the truth was much darker. Beneath his calm, harmless appearance was a man grappling with disturbing desires. He spent his days in isolation, cultivating an obsession with dominance and control, his thoughts veering towards violence as a way to satisfy his twisted fantasies. William Andrews' interactions with the world were few and far between. However, he was strategic. He understood the anonymity that came with living in a community where no one cared enough to look closely. This anonymity gave him the perfect cover. He knew exactly who to target: vulnerable individuals, often those who were homeless, addicted to drugs, or otherwise marginalized. These were the people whose disappearances would slip under the radar, their lives easily erased from memory. His method was chillingly simple. He would lure his victims into his home with promises of shelter or comfort, only for them to become trapped in his nightmarish web. Inside the confines of his home, William Andrews' true nature revealed itself. What appeared to be an unremarkable house was actually a prison, where his victims met a brutal and violent end. The stench of decay became a constant presence in the neighborhood, but it was ignored by those around him. For years, Andrews' crimes went unnoticed. He was able to hide in plain sight, blending into a neighborhood where everyone was just trying to survive. Despite strange noises coming from his home and the increasing disappearance of local residents, no one ever thought to question him. Fear of confrontation and apathy toward the suffering of others allowed Andrew to continue his reign of terror unchecked. It wasn't until one brave survivor managed to escape that the full extent of Andrew's crimes came to light. This courageous woman's testimony brought law enforcement to his door, and what they uncovered inside was beyond anything they could have imagined. William Andrews' house was revealed to be a true house of horrors, a place where his disturbing fantasies had been carried out for years. His hidden life, built on manipulation and violence, shattered the illusion of the quiet neighborhood he had inhabited for so long. The discovery of William Andrews' crimes sent shockwaves through the community, leaving behind scars that would take years to heal. For the residents of Elmwood, a once quiet neighborhood that had slowly decayed under the weight of poverty and neglect, the revelation that a predator had lived among them undetected was both terrifying and heartbreaking. Families who had dismissed the eerie disappearances as just another part of urban life were now forced to confront the chilling reality: someone had been hunting victims right in their midst. William Andrews' trial became one of the most publicized criminal cases in the state's history. Courtrooms were packed with reporters, families of the victims, and horrified citizens who couldn't believe the extent of his crimes. Prosecutors painted a picture of a remorseless predator, a man who exploited the most vulnerable and discarded them as if they were nothing more than objects. Evidence collected from his house, a trove of personal belongings from victims, blood-stained floors, and chilling journal entries, sealed his fate. Defense attorneys attempted to argue mental illness, childhood trauma, and an abusive past. But the jury remained unmoved. The case was not just about William Andrew, it was about justice for those who had been ignored for far too long. After weeks of testimony, deliberation was swift. The verdict, guilty on all counts. When the judge handed down the sentence, life without parole, there was a mix of relief and grief. Some families felt justice had been served, others believed no punishment could truly compensate for the pain he had inflicted. Regardless, William Andrew would never see the outside world again. Elmwood would never be the same. The house where Andrew carried out his crimes was condemned and later demolished, but the psychological damage remained. Many residents struggled with guilt. How had they ignored the signs? Some had dismissed the screams, the strange smells, the disappearances as just another part of life in a crime-ridden area. Now, they wondered, could they have saved lives if they had spoken up sooner? Local organizations rallied to provide counseling services, support groups, and initiatives to help rebuild trust within the community. Law enforcement also faced criticism for their slow response to missing persons reports. In the aftermath, reforms were introduced, ensuring that every missing persons case, regardless of the victim's social or economic status, received immediate attention. One of the most lasting impacts of the case was the way it forced society to reckon with how certain lives are valued. Many of Andrew's victims had been individuals who lived on the margins, homeless, struggling with addiction, or estranged from their families. Their disappearances had barely made the news before the case broke. But in the years that followed, their names were remembered. Memorials were erected, scholarships established in their honor, and advocacy groups formed to fight for better protections for society's most vulnerable. Their stories were no longer forgotten. For the families, closure remained elusive. While justice had been served, the pain never truly faded. However, in their grief, many found purpose, turning their loss into a call for action, ensuring that no one else would suffer the same fate unnoticed. Subscribe to this channel for more exclusive videos that uncover the darkest true crime story.